My name is Elana, and I use they, them pronouns.
And my name's Jesi. I use she, her pronouns.
And
we're
we're
Making
making
Mensches. Making Mensches is your home for queer, anti-Zionist Jewish ritual, radical education, and community.
Uncertainty about tomorrow poisons every minute of the bitter enslavement of the Jewish community of Warsaw. We are given 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 3 months, or 4 months to live. Nerves already on edge quiver. Have we learned nothing from this horrible experience? Shall we allow ourselves to be lulled by a good word from one or another German murder spread by Jewish stool pigeons or gullible persons? There is no doubt that Nazism has set itself the task of annihilating the Jews. Let us open our eyes and boldly face the truth. Don't trust the Jewish big shots, the shop leaders, or the foremen. They are your enemies. Don't be fooled by them. Don't allow yourselves to be persuaded that skilled artisans and senior workers are more secure. Everyone is in danger. As we stand face to face to death, let us not be dung heaps or worms, but engage in mutual aid. Traitors that help the enemy must be spewed out of the community. Do not allow yourselves to be slaughtered like sheep. Remember that you stand in the forefront of the battle for freedom and humanity. Let freedom live. And this is from a text that's a commemoration of the Warsaw Ghetto and Tal al-Za'atar. It's from a document called From the Land of Palm Tree to the Far Off Land of Snow. Yeah, I read that and I was like, that's intense.
Also wondering what you're thinking about let us not be dung heaps or worms as someone who
Yo, the way I need to turn that
loves.
into a zine or something.
I'm like, yeah, okay, I guess this is not the episode to get caught up in the language of like let us not be worms when I'm like, actually maybe let us be worms.
Right.
But like the idea of like in this moment, this like terrifying moment, engage in mutual aid is really
Engage in
powerful.
mutual aid, right? And then there was this other excerpt from the same document. It says, the message flashed over the secret radio waves of the resistance organizations. Hello, hello. The survivors of the Warsaw Ghetto have begun an armed resistance against the murderers of the Jewish people. The ghetto is aflame. Woo!
Wow.
Arise, my people, and fight for life. Let every mother become a lioness defending her children. That was the vibe. That was them saying abolitionist practices. That is what we need right now.
And it's so powerful. We're releasing this episode on or around Pesach, and what a holiday to be talking about abolition on. I mean, that's why we wanted to align this conversation that we've been wanting to have for so long with this holiday, because it's a holiday literally about liberation and like breaking free and freedom and all of the complexity that goes with that.
Did you know that the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising started the night before Passover in 1943?
I did know this. This is like living in the recesses of my brain somewhere. It's living in
Important
the recesses of
reminder
my
for
brain.
everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes Passover calls for pistols and Molotov cocktails.
Oh, I feel so heavily and consistently the desire to like depoliticize, or the drive to like depoliticize, I'm quoting that, Passover by so many Jews. Something someone said to me about the Making Mensches Seder last year was like, I needed to look past all the activism in the Seder, quote
Oof.
unquote. But then I could see the beauty in what you created, which is like, okay. Um,
See, but the text itself is activism, is the
Exactly.
thing.
Exactly. I read that and I was like, this is the like what do you like the holiday, honestly, most Jewish holidays, but especially this Jewish holiday is literally about the activism, quote unquote. It's literally about the push for liberation. What better holiday to center around pushing for any form of liberation, whether Palestinian liberation or prison abolition here in on Turtle Island, like wherever
Yes.
it is, what better holiday to focus on that than Passover?
I actually went back into my email because I knew my rabbi wrote like a newsletter about this one year, and she said, The disgrace is no longer leaving the land of Israel, and I encourage everyone to read the Jew Witches primer on the three Israels. Rather than a story about leaving the land and coming back to the land, we're telling a story in which slavery and oppression become the disgrace and liberation the praise. We're telling a story from slavery and oppression to liberation. In this way, we're affirming diaspora Judaism in this observance, just period.
I've been like involved in abolition work for a really long time, and I've like long wanted to connect that with the work that we do as Making Mensches. And Jesse Taylor, who I'm talking to right now, has also been involved in abolitionist work and writing, I believe, for some time. And so when we started cooking on this, we were like, let's talk about the ways that Judaism and abolition have all of these overlaps that make it feel like really fluid and connective, at least for me. I'm like, of course Judaism and abolition go together. Of course can talk about them together. There's just like so much connection there. But to be clear, when we're talking about abolition, when I'm talking about abolition, what I'm talking about is the complete destruction of the prison industrial complex in the world, especially in the United States, where the prison industrial complex is the most violent. We're talking about the destruction of the entire system: prisons, jails, policing, parole, all the whole thing, the fake model of justice that we have in this country. That's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about abolition. I wonder, Jesse, if you want to speak to like what abolition means for you and what you mean when you're talking about abolition.
When I'm thinking about talking about abolition, I'm thinking of three main things. I'm thinking about transformation in practice, imagination in practice, and collective liberation in practice, specifically within the confines of interconnected violent structures, institutions, and systems. So what you were saying about systems, I'm reminded of this passage from Critical Resistance, and they have an essay on their website talking about abolition, and on it they say that the prison industrial complex is not an isolated system. So abolition, it's a broad strategy. You know how right now there's a whole bunch of like very popular viral infographics, quotes, essays, whatever, about regulating our nervous system, focusing on what our nervous system needs. I recently wrote an essay called "I'm Done Regulating My Nervous System," and I wrote it because something I've been trying to push back against in my own life right now is thinking of my bodily systems in isolated, individualistic ways. So the nervous system, it's inextricably linked to the skeletal system, endocrine system, respiratory, muscular, etc. It goes on and on, right? And they're all working together for a common goal, keeping me alive. And when I think about that as it relates to the prison industrial complex, I would argue that, at least the way I'm looking at abolition, it's not just about the prison system. It's about the global body politic as a whole, inextricably linked systems. So we have the prison system, we have jails, we have ICE detention centers, we have hospitals, we have schools that also function as these carceral colonial cells in this interconnected system of systems, if that makes sense. Down, like all the way down to the family as an institution. Except the difference is, unlike my body, our bodies, the global body politic isn't natural. It's manufactured by imperialist, fascist, anti-Black, anti-Semitic colonizers, right? And so when I'm thinking about abolition and what I mentioned, transformation, collective liberation, imagination, it's all of those values as actions that are going toward eliminating the conditions of possibility for that global body politic as we know it now. Because, let's say we do eliminate prisons, right? Are there still going to be carceral hospitals? Are there still going to be carceral schools? Let's say we close all jails that exist. Are there still going to be institutions in place that are necessarily going to ensure that certain communities are going to face domination, punishment that is violent, period? And ultimately, what it all comes down to, I think, is preventing genocide. from being possible. And so when I think of abolition, that's where my mind is going.
Thank you so much, Jesse. I think that's a really important grounding. It should feel really clear through what Jesse just shared and with that conceptualization of abolition, that abolition is inherently connected to any fight for liberation, but to the fight for Palestinian liberation. If we are someone who is grounded in abolitionist praxis, like, we inherently are going to be anti-Zionist because we believe in creating systems that are not systems of domination, like the nation state of Israel and its military force, the IOF.
If we go back to Torah, we have so many more opportunities to think about things in terms of abolitionist frameworks because we're going to be looking at legacies of resistance, period. Where is there resistance happening? Where is there anti-imperialism happening? Where is there any sort of engaged collective movement toward liberation of some kind? Then, I mean, you can look at most of the book of Exodus and you can read it as abolitionist text.
I actually feel like there are many parts of the Torah that are in like pretty deep opposition to abolitionist values, but as we've talked about previously, the Torah is complex and there's parts of it that we may identify with and parts of it we may not, because it's a collection of lots of different writing and viewpoint and opinion. But yeah, I guess I would love for us to talk more about some of the ways that the Torah feels abolitionist and language that exists in the Torah that feels really closely aligned with abolition.
Okay, so Exodus 12:1. I'm just going to read. It says, "The Eternal told Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt to tell the people, as deliverance from Egypt is to be not only from physical bondage, but also from spiritual slavery, you must break away from Egyptian influence altogether." And that for me is so key and so crucial and so inspirational. Mentioning spiritual slavery in this context, I think, is so important because one of the main ways that uprisings, rebellions, revolts are prevented is by impacting people's belief formation processes, impacting our understanding of what's possible, what's not possible, actions we should or should not take. And in this saying, not only from physical bondage, but also from spiritual slavery, they're really saying that we have been impacted and attacked, not just our bodies, our entire spirits, our souls, like our entire beings have been conditioned toward not only accepting enslavement, but not wanting to seek freedom or thinking it's impossible or just not even thinking about it at all. And I think it's really important to really keep that in mind. I mean, there are so many barriers to people being even able to say that abolition is a possibility. And the reasons why some people struggle to say that is because legitimately they were in underfunded schools where they didn't have access to the educational resources that could have shown them, oh, this has happened before. There is a thing called uprisings. Oh, and they work, and here is how. Then you could even go real deep with it and talk about toxic built environments and how being in places that are literally poisoning us are necessarily impacting our cognitive function. There are so many ways that colonialism is impacting our ability to dream, to imagine, and think ourselves in other worlds aside from this one. And so for me, yeah, Exodus 12:1, I think is a really great point of departure for thinking about how we can read abolition in the Torah.
And I feel like kind of gets at what we were talking about when we were defining abolition, which is that it's not just about the singular system or the singular site of violence. It's about all of it. It's about our internal world or the communities that we're in or the families that we're in. It's about what's happening in our own minds. I feel like it's this concept of killing the cop in your head, needing to, for yourself, remove the learned violence and all the things that we've been socialized to believe are true about our world, about ourselves, about the people around us, about justice.
I really like the part that you chose to, Jesse, because often when we have these like fantasies of abolition, sometimes it tends to like the big acts, you know, of like the sea splitting and like all of these like magical, supernatural kind of huge moments. And what is actually more effective, what the entire book of Leviticus ends up being about, right? Is you can't like supernatural your way out of prison systems, right? You have to do the hard work of the laws and the undoing of all of that kind of internalized colonialism and slavery inside their brains. It's kind of like the later when they're like, don't ever go back to Egypt again. Like, not even for horses, not for food, nothing. Like, don't go back to that system just because like you're in a bad place. It's not always the fantastical stuff. It's sometimes the boring, laborious stuff about like undoing your learnings.
Yo, exactly. I love everything you just said so much. And one thing that came to mind when you said that was the Hebrew midwives that refused to kill the baby boys, like early on in Exodus, where sort of now I'm at Exodus 1:15-17. And this was on my mind earlier too when I was thinking about like legacies of resistance. But yeah, going away from like the supernatural, these like big things, it's like, no, sometimes it's the pharaoh or I don't know, a president or something telling you if you see any baby boys be born, you need to kill them. And you being like, you know what? Actually, I'm like not going to do that. Actually, that's the thing I'm not going to do. And it's it really like highlights the bigness too of these quote small moments. I say sometimes, you know, like every breath is an opportunity, every moment is an opportunity. And I don't even mean that in a cliche way. Like that's really what it means. It's like every moment that, you know, you have capacity, ability to make a decision, especially when you're within the confines of a violent system, what is the decision that you're going to make? And sometimes it really is the difference between am I going to literally perpetuate violent systems right now, or am I going to make a different decision instead, like choosing creation? I'm not going to destroy something else. Now's my opportunity to create something, put a different kind of system in place, choose otherwise.
I'm coming back to, as always, the Kwame Ture quote that talks about, I'm looking at it because I have it on my wall, that talks about when people talk about revolution and being revolutionary, people are like think that it's about destruction, but actually it's about creation. And I think this is a misconception both with abolition and with anti-Zionism. In many ways, like it's not just about the destruction of a system. It's about the creation of something new. It's about creating, it's about rebirthing and composting as Rocki is always talking about. And I need us all to really reframe when we're talking about things like abolition and anti-Zionism to be thinking of it as these creation moments, actually. Something that really stuck out to me, Jesse, from what you were sharing about Leviticus, as the less Torah savvy person, I always love to hear y'all talk about Torah stuff. And this idea of the like, don't go back for any reason, and like, how do we actually create systems that keep us from the system that we were living in or the mindset that we were living in, makes me think a lot about the question that comes up, I think, for many people when they hear the concept of abolition around like, but what about X? Like Miriam Kaba has this great zine, what about the rapists, that basically answers the question, like the kind of gotcha question that I feel like everyone brings up when you tell them that you're an abolitionist. And it's like, well, you certainly can't mean like that we actually wouldn't have prisons. Like, what about murder, rape, da 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 da? Like, insert thing that people cannot conceive of here. And I think that's when, yeah, we like push and like take note from the Torah in this way, where it's like, no, we actually mean that there is a better way to engage with justice. We actually mean that, or I actually mean that I'm looking for like a different response to violence than the one that exists, and I am looking to us to create it and foster the mechanisms we already have that address it in a different way.
What's coming up for me now is there's another like little note that I took from the Critical Resistance website, and they talk about developing practical strategies for taking small steps that move us toward making our dreams real and that lead us all to believe that things really could be different. It means living this vision in our daily lives. Abolition is both a practical organizing tool and a long-term goal. And I feel like that speaks to exactly what you're saying. And also, I found this other text in the archives called To Fight Against Injustice is to Be a Jew, Jewish Alliance Against Zionism, 1978 to 1982. And in it, they say, we began to discuss what our positions should be beyond general support for the Palestinians and how to make a positive assertion rather than a negative anti-stance. So rather than trying to form a quote left pole among Jews, my focus now switched to promoting Palestine as a core part of the peace and anti-racist movement. So both of those things, but really switching to like a what are we going to do? What will be made a pattern? What will be made a habit? What will be built? Or even what should be kept? Because it's not like everything needs to be dismantled or everything needs to be destroyed. I mean, if that was the case, then nothing from the past would have, been successful. But there are clearly some things, time and time again, like that quote you keep going back to. There are some things, whether material, immaterial, like quotes, etc., whatever, that show there are things that should be lasting too.
And there's so much like in our world that already exists that moves us away from these systems and structures. Like there have literally always been other modes. And I think the Torah represents that. There's always been other ways. There's always been like community and connection, like restorative justice as a concept, like calls on indigenous practices. Like restorative justice is not a new mode of being, it's an ancient mode of being. Like, so I think that that's an important point. Like it's not that we're throwing everything out and destroying it all. We're just pulling on the things that we need to take with us to continue building towards the world that we want. Like we are living in the world that we're creating as we're creating it.
There's this essay that Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote when he was in seminary. This was in 1951. I'm just going to read the first couple of sentences. He says, Karl Marx, the German philosopher and economist, stated that capitalism carries the seed of its own destruction. There is an obvious fallacy in that statement. The fallacy is that it is limited to capitalism, leaving the impression that other social movements do not carry the seed of their own destruction. The actual fact is that every social institution carries the seed of its own destruction. Its survival depends on the way the seed is nourished. What you just said reminded me of that because you said we have what we need to do the thing is here. We have the things.
There's a belief in Orthodoxy and more conservative Jewish circles that Torah is perfect and there's no mistakes. And so people think that means there's no mistakes in the record and there's no mistakes in the double narrative that sometimes happens. And that leads people to kind of reject that thought that Torah is perfect. Also, from an anti-Zionist or anti-oppressive lens, Torah does not seem perfect, right? Like it seems violent. It seems like encouraging wiping out other cultures. It seems like it is very much a conflicting and deeply confusing text. But what I think about in this context is like Torah is perfect because it captures the entirety of human and non-human imaginations and dreamings and feelings, right? Like it captures that urge to destroy. It captures that urge to create and to build. It captures the extent to which we can dream in a certain place, right? So it captures like when you are so oppressed, the only thing you can dream about sometimes is the destruction of your oppressor. And so that feeling of like, I just want destruction. I want to wipe these people out who have made me feel less than is something that is valuable and is a perfect feeling. Does it mean we act on it all the time throughout history? No, we should not. But the idea that Torah is somehow less valid or less worth exploring because it captures that feeling that we all have, whether we want to reject it or not, is kind of silly to me. So I think when we think through like the problematic parts that seem to be going against abolition, if we're talking about like an abolition of systems that like define us as good or bad people, depending on the feelings we have when certain things come up, Torah really captures the expanse of feelings throughout time and history and the ability to dream up new systems when we're in a system that oppresses us. So in that way, I think it is perfect. And in that way, I think we can engage with it in a way of like understanding where the people are at different points in the Torah instead of criticizing them for not being as progressive as we are in this day and age or wish we were.
That actually leads right into what I was thinking. What came to mind for me was the parsley and the bitter herbs on the Seder plate. When we think very seriously, realistically, like literally about conditions of enslavement and what people are actually seriously enduring, going through on a daily basis, whether on the plantation, on the slave ship, in the ghetto, in Gaza. It's when people are having these responses that you talked about, you know, the wanting to destroy this person that's causing them this suffering. And it's like, let's be really serious about why they're feeling that way. If I was living in an area where I knew that my neighbors and loved ones were carrying around their toddlers in plastic bags as body parts, I would want to do something like that too. I think about people who, you know, have uprisings in prisons. I would also want to attack somebody who was making me lay in my shit for days and literally didn't care if I lived or died. When you think about the actual conditions of enslavement, it just makes sense why people have responses like that. The way I see it is we're all captives. Like any colonized, marginalized, criminalized person is a captive, right? We have different conditions of enslavement, yes. And also the fact that anybody is experiencing those conditions. It's like, yeah, it makes sense why you'd want to do whatever you possibly could to eliminate the conditions of possibility for anybody experiencing that. And you mentioned like bringing in the non-humans as well. I've been thinking about the Combahee River raid. The people, the hundreds of people led by Harriet Tubman who freed themselves, literally burned down plantations. They knew those lands so intimately. You know, so when I'm thinking of the bitter herbs, when I'm thinking of the parsley, when I'm thinking about these non-humans, but also kin on the Seder plate, it's like, who are all of us who are necessarily being impacted by colonialism? It's not just humans. Our shared planetary homebody is the captive to colonialism, to imperialism, to fascism, to anti-Blackness, to anti-Semitism, to Islamophobia. But all of these violent systems, our shared planetary homebody is the captive. And abolition is all of our shared planetary homebodies saying, actually, no. Actually, no, however possible.
I think that just speaks to how interconnected, like we were talking about in the beginning, all of it is. Like the idea that anyone could champion being an environmentalist or like an eco-feminist or care deeply about climate justice and could not see the connection between that and abolition of prison industrial complex, like end of a genocide in Palestine, to me feels really hard to see how anyone could like detach from those and identify with one and not the others, because they're so obviously connected to each other, both in like intangible ways and in really tangible ways, like what you're talking about. Like violent systems destroy the environment. That means both like it's the people there, but also like the literal physical world that we live in. And we've seen this with the way that the environment has been destroyed in Palestine, and we see it with the ways that prisons pollute the communities that they're a part of. We see it in so many different ways all the time.
And then even the language that we're conditioned to use for non-human, more than human kin, we're supposed to not see them as alive so that we can normalize their destruction and to normalize ecocide, which is a part of this as well, also inextricably linked. And it's just that it just goes so deep. It's how we think about things, how we talk about things, the words we have available to us to use, the ones where even if we create our own language, like where are we able to use that language? What can we say? What can we not say? What is censored when we're on social media? Why can we only use 5 hashtags now? And it's like it seems it's like what it's not that deep. It is. It is. And then it's even deeper than that because in order for these systems to be able to be perpetuated, there has to be a mass buy-in, a mass buy-in. It has to seem normal. I mean, even if it doesn't, even if there are people who are like, okay, this isn't normal, they still have to be just comfortable enough with the status quo to not feel any sort of, no, you know what? But some of them do feel the obligation to do something otherwise. But that's why carcerality, domination, threatened, being threatened with punishment, knowing that you can literally just go outside and get shot in the head if you like do the wrong thing. Like they need to make sure that there's control and that people are literally ill enough, weakened enough, numbed enough. That's a whole other thing too. That's part of the abolition conversation as well, is how are violent systems preventing us from being present in our own bodies to be able to allow ourselves to feel our way through things. We even see it in the ways that violent systems impact interpersonal relationships, how they purposely try to isolate people and create barriers to people having intimate connections with people. It's weird that it's my favorite passage, I guess, in the Torah, but it's when Aaron goes silent after his sons are fucking murdered, like burst into flames. And he's just silent and his heart is hardened. And to me, this goes back to what we were saying about like spiritual slavery. Like, do we think that Aaron was free to express himself in that moment? Like, do we actually think he was free in that moment? I'd argue no.
I want to share that I actually had compassion for Aaron for the first time ever reading this. I know you've been with me on this journey of hating Aaron. And I finally identified with Aaron in the working in a broken system and like being the person who is trying to quell the kind of horror and devastation of watching a broken system continue to be broken. And right, like the people, it's not a perfect comparison because the people don't know what's happening, right? They're just scared. There's just a lack of leadership in the moment and they're scared. And for the first time, I viewed Aaron's decision to like with the golden calf, he's like, the people have to do something. Like they need their hands to do something. Like they need to just be moving. So, okay, like collect all the jewelry, like go do the thing. Right. And he's like, I believe that if I just like keep them busy or like keep doing something, this will work out. And it works out for him the first time, right? Like the golden calf, like Moses comes down the mountain. It's okay. Like, yeah, he gets in trouble for a second. And the people, there's like this massacre, but he holds the Jewish people together, like lineage wise for the future of Judaism in that moment. Like he gives them a task to do and they are able to regroup after, because otherwise it could have been mass panic. People could have fled. People could have all killed each other, but like he holds it together and that works out for him. And then the next time we really hear about Aaron is this like horrible, sad moment and it's inaction. And it just reminds me of that moment when you're in a broken system where you're like, I've been doing this, I've been going along, like I've been trying, I believe, and then you face a moment that's so horrifying that you're like, do I believe in this system? Like, is there any hope for this? Is there any redeeming? And like at that moment for the Jewish people, it doesn't feel super hopeful. They're just like walking around the desert, like constantly getting in trouble over and over again. And like, yes, God is with them, but God is also mad at them. And it feels scary and tense. And like, I don't know. For the first time, I just thought of Aaron as like a middle manager who just doesn't really know like what's going on, but is trying his best to like not freak the people out because he's the priest. Like he's supposed to hold it all together. So like he's in a terrible position. And so, yes, so I would agree, like to be a middle manager in a system that is not yet healed or formed or like is struggling to be born, you have moments of inaction or like grief that overpower you and you feel like, how do I even respond? And sometimes the absence of response is the most shocking thing because until this point he's been agreeable and he goes along. So I was like seeing parallels in my career of having moments of like being so horrified with the way things are, not knowing like how to act or what to say, because my grief feels like it would impact so many other people or make other people scared, or like, anyway, so that was like my little Aaron aside.
I love to see it. I love to see the changing and the thoughts about Aaron. And it's hard, yo. I wrote an essay once about that specific moment, and something that I thought about was male coded forms of emotional labor. Stay with me. When I was mentioning earlier, like, is Aaron really free? Something that's coming to mind for me is, for whom is it normalized to fully and openly express your full range of emotions? And how is not being able to do that freely impacting your ability to, one, be present in your body, and two, show up presently for movements for collective liberation, like people who aren't able to process their emotions and then also aren't given safe spaces to be able to practice doing that. And so it makes me think, like, Aaron, like, I bet there were many reasons why he would not have just broken down in tears or started wailing or started screaming. And that was the main reason when I really first started thinking about that moment. I just had so much sympathy and empathy for him. It's like I think about how long it took me to like learn how to really like be with my emotions. Like the quote, like angry black woman trope, like really impacted me for a while. I refused to let myself be angry or feel my rage. I would avoid it at all costs. And the thing about anger and rage is that those are messengers. They tell us when something's wrong. And when we're not able to feel, it negatively impacts our ability to properly discern what's going on around us and whether or not we need to change. We can get really comfortable in dysfunction and abusive dynamics because of what that conditioning, what that abuse is doing to our actual brains, and then impacting all of these different systems, right? And so there's this like neurological, full body story to tell about that journey towards being able to even recognize abolition as not only an option, but something that's needed. And in this weird way, I feel like, assuming Aaron wanted to break down and cry, I also don't want to like assume how he was feeling or anything like that. But I'm like guessing he was like really sad. You know what I mean? And thinking about just like the very, everyday, quotidian, like practical, like day in the life of thinking about abolition, even that, being denied access to being able to feel and really feel fully, and being able to integrate and then release. There's so much that is literally living inside so many of our bodies. It's just stored there, held there. And that's, in turn, it's a feedback loop. It just makes us ill. It makes us sicker. It gives us literal autoimmune disorders and diseases, and then kills us faster.
Have you guys seen the Cesar Chavez stuff coming out today?
Dude, oh my gosh.
He raped kids, and he raped Dolores Huerta, and she had 2 kids in secret from being raped by him, and she had to like raise them in other places, and now like her family is unified in a way. But just thinking about this, like,
Wow.
first of all, okay, the New York Times is the one that broke it. And just thinking about like carceral systems, like the New York Times has become a carceral system. Like there's no way that they are not like accomplices to genocide in any history book that we'll ever read. Like they have propped up the Israeli regime. They've propped up so many harmful dynamics within the United States. So the fact that they're the ones that are like, we did this investigation, it's terrible. My immediate first reaction was like, is it like, did somebody else? But then once I saw Dolores Huerta speaking out about it, I'm like, fuck, what do we do? I'm seeing all these mayors and like different local officials who are in charge of like statues and streets named after him and all of this being like, we have to cover it up and like we have to take down these, like, how do we get justice, right, for people who will never get justice because it happened 60 years ago, like long times ago, that like no one can be held accountable, right, for what he did because he is dead, and like she is living with this impact, and so are these women who had to grow up with this trauma. Like, that is also the limitations of a carceral system, right? Like, what do you do with this trauma when there's nobody, no one person to hold accountable? And I think that shows us that like abolition allows for an expansion beyond like the one person suffering for the crimes they committed. Like, what do we do to heal beyond just like punishing a person or taking down the statue? Because like, devastating for the movement, devastating for labor history, like all of this stuff, right? But like, what is the alternative world here? What is the repair? What is the dream? Is like so much more of a productive conversation to me than like, how are we going to tear down the statues and not give people Cesar Chavez Day anymore, you know?
That reminds me of when I first learned about Eldridge Cleaver, who, was one of the leaders of the Black Panther Party and a serial rapist, bringing up how patriarchal violence has been a barrier to lasting movement building. Something that just came to mind when I said that was like the numbers of youth pastors, like in Christian churches, who end up being found out as being serial harmers or pedophiles. And it's like, if we just go back to, these are interconnected violent systems. Patriarchy is one of them. And what's wild is like, as many times as I've, like listed out different violent systems, I think it's interesting that I haven't named patriarchy like explicitly, because for me, it's just like the bedrock on which all of them are built. So I feel like I just like, it's like, oh, that's just a given when I name them. But it's like, no, it has to be named, because back to, the everyday quotidian, when we're in these movement spaces, how many people are we alienating and don't even know? Because there could be people in these movements. I mean, what am I even talking about? It's literally happened to me before. There have been movement spaces I've had to leave because of that. And that's not a unique story. It's very common. I mean, the data's out there. You can see the statistics for yourself. And it's just heartbreaking that so often it ends up coming down to that. And even taking decades, not even, I don't want to say to feel safe enough to share. Who knows if she felt safe sharing that? But the fact that it took decades and there were children involved, so many things had to go so wrong. One, for any of that to be possible in any of these movement groups. And two, for it to stay a secret for so long. But then we like open this up and it's like, if we bring in the Me Too movement, which sadly is necessarily linked to this too, it just shows how expansive these webs of violence are and all the different ways that they impact movement building. Like, they all become barriers to collective liberation, all of them.
Yeah, and I just thought of your like the staying silent of it all, right? Like the staying silent in Aaron, the staying silent for Dolores Huerta, like the idea of like staying silent to protect something or to preserve something, I think is something we don't talk about enough in abolition, in our daily lives, and just thinking of the like large system ways we stay silent. And sometimes it's in awe and shock and grief and horror, and sometimes it's in overwhelm of helplessness or feelings of helplessness because of the idea of loss and like what we would lose if we had to like really fight the system in the way that we wanted to. Thinking through that in movement spaces too, the double drama of, right, like the patriarchy but also the system. So like you don't want to expose a fellow movement member because then they're a victim of the system, but in some ways we like keep people within the movement who harm us because of that fear of the external system, and we're trying to build these systems of accountability, but it is hard not to reproduce carceral systems when faced with harm within our own movements.
So as I prepare for going to seminary, I've been doing a lot more like interfaith research on different things. I've been reading a lot of sermons and watching a lot of sermons, and you reminded me of this sermon that I watched the other day called Making It Through with Matriarchal Magic by Reverend Amanda Hambrick Ashcroft. And she says, Matriarchal magic is refusing to let death narrate the future. It is sacred improvisation. And get this, it's not about idolizing women. This is actually beyond gender. It is about recognizing hidden labor that sustains us all and about rejecting the rigid boxes of law-infused patriarchy that harms us all. Matriarchal magic allows us to hold on because it's God who makes the promise. It's God who calls into existence the things that do not yet exist that we make as we co-labor with her. And that's what, oh, and it also says relational endurance, collective carrying, midwifing new worlds. And what's funny is I read that from the transcript on the YouTube page for her sermon. And the first comment says, you need to get saved and get a relationship with the Lord. And so basically all of the comments are bashing the sermon, right? And all I can think is what we were talking earlier about trying to depoliticize Passover. How on earth could anybody hear anything that woman just said and be like, you need to get saved and get a relationship? Like the fact that in these specifically spiritual, faith-based spaces, there is this culture of silencing as well, where it's like we can't even be completely open and honest and transparent in these quote divine spaces where we're supposed to be like repairing the world and being decent beings on this divine planet. And even there, we're coerced into being silent about what we're seeing in our spaces.
This conversation just about sexual violence and rape is and abolition and like how all those things tie together is making me think of, and I'll put this in our show notes, but the letter to the anti-rape movement. This is like a 1977 letter that was written by a few members of this group called Santa Cruz Women Against Rape, and then Miriam Kaba created a zine like introducing the letter and like talking about the letter, I think in 2020. And it really just talks about how being opposed to sexual violence, which I would hope that I would hope all of us are opposed to sexual violence, does not need to mean that we are leaning on carceral systems and carcerality and the current criminal legal system as the way to engage with that. Like, none of those systems actually prevent more sexual violence from happening. None of them, actually, many of the systems cause more sexual violence to happen. We don't need to talk about this now, but thinking about the rates of like sexual violence that people who are incarcerated experience, or rates of violence that people experience from people who are police officers, that aside, the abolitionist movement is largely built by survivors of sexual violence. That is a product of living under these oppressive systems. So the answer to moving us towards a world in which, like, I don't know that a world exists in which sexual violence doesn't exist because I haven't lived in it yet. I want to believe it's possible, and I believe part of that means really deeply unlearning patriarchy and moving outside of patriarchal systems. But even besides that, I don't know that our goal needs to be moving towards a world but moving towards a world that understands actually how to engage with survivors and how to engage with people who have caused harm, because it's not as simple as like perpetrator survivor binary. Like, people who cause harm have often been harmed. People who are harmed have often caused harm. It's all cyclical, and it all is a product of the system that we live within. So really, abolition moves us closer to something more, something better for everyone.
That's so important. I recently heard somebody, like, while they were giving us, an introduction to who this person was, they were talking about how they were going to share about their history of abuse, but their experiences as somebody who experienced it and as somebody who themselves had abused somebody before. And what that brings to mind for me is, like, as we're trying to, expand our understandings of certain things, part of it too is being like, how are the ways I am, what are the ways I am complicit in whatever kind of perpetuation of any kind of violent system. What is that? What is that like? And when we're all honest with ourselves about that, how does that change the conversations? How does that change the questions that we ask and the ways that we seek to answer them when we're honest about the fact that it's really difficult, if not impossible, to live in such a way that you're not in some way multiple times a day perpetuating violent systems that are necessarily impacting large amounts of people. And that then also changes the conversation where it's like, what do we mean when we say cause and effect? What do we mean when we say impact? In what way? How far reaching is the impact? Like, what are the ripples of that impact when we think more expansively about, the power that we do have? Because we do have power, and that power has impacts. And it's like, what really are they?
The complexity of like honoring that ultimately there are survivors of sexual violence, intimate partner violence, child sexual abuse who want carcerality, who want the person who harmed them to be incarcerated or experience some form of punishment through the criminal legal system. And that is like something that we have to grapple with. And I think that's also a product of the fact that that's the only system we think we have to address harm. And I think that I'm saying this for people who are listening who might be survivors themselves. I'm sure there are many folks who are listening who are survivors of various kinds of harm. If you are listening to this and you're like, fuck you, I want my abuser to be punished, I hear you. And I hear you. I really hear you. And I just want to say that. That's full stop. I hear you. And that's real. And I'm thinking about the ways that I almost said the only system we have is the criminal legal system to address harm. And it's just not true. I'm thinking of organizations like Hidden Water in New York City, which is a restorative justice organization that uses restorative justice circles for people who have been impacted in some way by child sexual assault. And the way that they do this is through a multitude of circles. And the circles are for people who were harmed sexually as a child, for people who did cause harm to a child, for caregivers of a child who was harmed, and for people who both were harmed themselves and caused harm. And then another circle for people who were impacted because someone that they love either caused sexual harm or was harmed by sexual violence. And I'm just these models exist, they exist, and people are using them. There are other options. And I think it's important just to call us kind of back to the conversation we were having earlier. We are creating the world we want to live in as we live in it. And it has always been here. It's not new. These systems have existed and we build on them. And there are other options that don't perpetuate more harm.
Abolition doesn't mean no consequences. And I feel like this goes back to our conversation maybe about spiritual slavery. Part of the spiritual slavery is, like I said, these barriers to imagination, right? When we're conditioned to believe that there are not a lot of examples of abolitionist frameworks in action, the transformative justice models, the restorative justice models, whomever doesn't have access to that information, right? They're going to think, well, this hasn't been done before. Why would I put my faith in something that I don't even think is going to work? Because there's no proof that this has ever worked or anything like that. When we have more opportunity to be able to think on these, to imagine, to dream about abolition together, because we've come together in good faith to be not only do we believe this is possible, but we believe that we can help build the stuff that makes it possible, right? Once you go into it with that mindset, that's when the possibility really begins. The job of colonizers is to make us think that not only are there no options, but it's not even worth thinking about. And in the case of certain kinds of harm, how amazing would it be to have really honest conversations with people about how would we actually handle this? For real, how would we actually handle this? What are some options? What are some possibilities? What does this look like? And being really honest about the contradictions. Because in my own life, there have been times where I've been would I love for this person to rot under the jail? Yes. And also, no, like never. And that contradiction right there is so real, and you feel it, and it's in your body, and you live it. And it's legitimate. It's like, yes, I want this. Like I want this and I don't want this. I do not want it as bad as I do want it. And like grappling with that contradiction is so much. When I was even doing research like for this episode, I was like, it is so heartbreaking how few resources there really are, just like comparatively. Like you can find hundreds and hundreds of papers on, I don't know, antisocial interactions, which is very important. That is so important. And so is abolition. But there's just not as wide of a net that can be cast to find that information. And that is on purpose. There's a reason why that's the case. One thing I did find that I thought was really awesome. Have y'all heard of a song called Zognit Kein Mal?
No.
So it's this song that is written by someone named Hirsch Glick, and it was played during events for the Jewish Alliance Against Zionism. And my favorite verse from the song, the lyrics are, so it's a Yiddish song, but I'm not going to sing it in Yiddish right now. But it's, the song is written with blood and not with lead. It's not a tune sung by birds in the wild. This song was sung by people amidst collapsing walls, sung with pistols in their hands. And I was happy to stumble upon a lot of like Jewish armed resistance history and looking up abolition and Jewish history. But it's like, there's a reason why we protect ourselves with certain kinds of weapons when we go up against the oppressor. I mean, I doubt a lot of us are thinking we're gonna like get in front of them and like dance our way out of shackles. There's a lot here.
Connecting those two ideas about liberation and armed resistance and not healing from your trauma can inflict trauma on other people. Like we're back to the Jewish case for colonization of the land of Palestine, right? Like we're back to this idea of weaponizing our trauma against people who never should have been the victims of it in the first place. Not that anybody should be the victims of our Jewish trauma, but like the idea that you can inflict pain on other people because of the pain that you've experienced in another part of the world is so deeply tied into this like Jewish militaristic concept that's so hard to pull out, that like we can have armed resistance against Nazis and that is justified, and that is nothing to do with what's happening in Palestine, because the Zionist movement has done such an effective brainwashing job in the world of like linking the two. And I think just thinking through like ways to extract our history of Jewish armed resistance against oppressors from this like Zionist narrative of armed resistance in the name of defending a colonial project, that work takes so long. And I find myself as a person who very much believes in armed resistance, almost sometimes abandoning the history of Jewish armed resistance because so many people ended up being Zionists or ended up used by the Zionist cause to become like heroes in a way that they never would have wanted to be, or just, you know, like the way that Zionism as an institution corrupts our own history that had nothing to do with Zionism, right? Like, but that Jewish armed resistance has been co-opted by them to like justify their project.
No, 100%. Speaking of defending colonial projects, I'm thinking about the normalization again. I'm getting to think it's so normal. And I'm thinking about these now viral TikToks specifically of Black Gen Zers in the US settler state military. Their TikToks going viral. And that normalization process, it's just having me reflect on the different stages of genocide. Like, I mean, it makes sense that we're most often shown images and told, you know, facts, figures, data about the most just horrific. There are people in their early 20s, some of them teenagers, in US settler state military uniforms doing dance challenges to try and lure other youth to join them in defending the colonial project. And I mean, that makes me think of birthright, obviously, but it's like what makes it so insidious is how so many of these things have to function in such a specific way in order for it to even be possible for the genocidal product to be as flourishing as it is. And I hate to like put it in that way, but it's thriving. The genocidal projects are thriving, and the ways it's normalized and incentivized.
I was thinking about how shocking I think it can feel sometimes to see black and brown cops and people in the military, and then you have to remind yourself, like, that's intention. Like, these systems, policing, military, like, prey on people of the global majority, because that's what it is, but I guess marginalized communities, to do the work for them because they know they're able to leverage certain incentives. And so we need to like reflect on how people even become entrenched in those systems, or the ways that it is maybe feels safer for people to be entrenched in the systems instead of pushing against them. And remember that like this is what we're pushing back against. Like all of that is what we are pushing against. And I think sometimes like we lose sight of that when we just see something that like on the surface feels like, what the fuck, dude? But it's like there's all of these like, yeah, the systemic, this macro level picture of how that happens. And I hope no one's takeaway from this conversation, hopefully after our clarification it's not, but I hope no one's takeaway is that we are not for violent resistance as abolitionists. I think that that is like essential to, honestly, sorry, I do, I don't know that everyone thinks that, but because of the fact which so many people have said in the past, much more wise and well-read thinkers than I have said, that like we cannot push back against an oppressor that uses violence without using violence. It's not possible.
I'm sitting here feeling like Aaron. I'm sitting here reflecting, silent, because like as you're talking, I'm like, there's so much I want to say that I am terrified to say, which is part of the conversation too. And when I say terrified to say it, because see, but this is part of the conversation. Here's the thing. Up until now, I was being 100% fully honest, transparent, and I'm still being honest, I'm still being transparent. And also, there's some stuff that I'm too scared to say because of what's going on. And it's so like I feel it in my body. I feel it in my chest. I feel it in my stomach. I feel it in my throat. Like it literally hurts. Like I'm literally burning inside. And I'm like, oh my God, is this how Aaron felt? I'm really just like, it's so fascinating. Fear is wild. Fear is a wild, wild thing. Okay, so tomorrow I'm reading a testimony at a city council hearing on the new budget for New York, and specifically as it relates to making sure that more funding is going toward community programs that are aimed at preventing recidivism and getting us closer to closing Rikers. And when you were talking about the macro stuff, that's what came to mind for me, thinking about budgets for cities and literally what is being invested in and how an area's values are necessarily revealed when you read a budget for something, and how many millions of dollars go towards normalizing, silencing, and instilling fear on people so that they don't talk about certain things, don't do certain things, don't go certain places, and allow the violent systems to be perpetuated. Like it's so calculated. Colonizer math is terrifying. Necropolitical city planning is really wild. And those moments we were talking about earlier, where it's like, whew, how do you respond? What do you do? And I'm like sitting here. Sure, there are many things about my like social positionality I could complain about, but I've got a roof. I'm sitting on the couch. Why am I so afraid to say that I am like 100% for violent resistance? Like, why am I so scared of that? Like, I used to wear guillotine earrings, right? And it's like, yes, that is a statement. And also, those aren't explicit words. And so I'm really sitting here, like, reflecting on just the layers of violence and how silencing works.
Yeah, I have goosebumps just because we're getting to the part where I start to feel daunted by it all. And like, fuck, like, there's so much money that, like, I'm thinking of like APAC and like the millions of dollars that they just poured into like the Chicago race to edge out people that they or who are explicitly anti-Zionist. And I'm thinking about even things that feel maybe on the surface less insidious, but like giving less money to public libraries, which are like one of the best examples we have of socialism in the world in capitalism, a place where people can go and get knowledge and resources and community for free. Oh my God, like that's incredible. And I don't know if this has changed since the last time I read something about it, but Mom Donnie sort of like didn't go all the way with the public library budget like he said he was going to, and like didn't actually put as much money as he said he was going to towards the public library budget. So even something like that's less insidious maybe than an APAC $1 billion contribution to like fuck up an election, it's just like big and heavy, and it can feel, I think, really scary and like a lot. And so maybe I'm wanting to ground us as we like move towards an end in the tangible ways that we push back and the tangible ways that we practice abolition in our everyday life, which is having conversations like this one and talking about how big it all is and how scary it all feels, but also like practicing teshuva with each other to bring Judaism back into the fold, like practicing being in conflict with our community, with the people in our lives, and repairing and taking accountability. And that maybe doesn't mean that the relationship is back to what it used to be. When I say repairing, I just mean like going through the process with someone, regardless of what the outcome is like on the other end, becoming really like honest with ourselves about what we've done and how we've showed up, and accepting people's decisions about our actions. Abolition is a lifelong process, and I think a process that impacts literally every single human and non-human being in our world.
I started thinking about counting the Omer and how, I mean, that's one of my favorite times of the year. Just this daily, intentional, guided reflection on the ways that the attributes of the divine, of God, of the universe, whatever you want to call it, the creator, how those attributes are embodied in us, or how we can practice them more. And I thought about chesed, loving kindness, and how, for me, more than anything else, abolition is rooted in love. It's not about just what are we destroying, it's what are we creating. And I'm thinking about my favorite Torah portion when they're building the sanctuary, and just how intentional and thoughtful and just the attention to detail that it took to create this sacred space together so that they could ground themselves in collective liberation and a connection to the divine while doing so. And so when you were talking about, like grounding us in something, I think for me, it's important to remind ourselves that it really is, like you said, it's a lifelong process. And part of that process is doing our best to be present moment to moment so that we can be embodied, we can feel our way through. And, we can intellectually say, XYZ is going on. And we can also say, And this is what me and like 30 other people in my life that I know personally are doing to actively combat violent systems on a regular basis in their communities, literally right now. That's what I always come back to. It's all of the places too. It's happening in Gaza. I have a friend named Khalil who lives there, has been going through it. And that is literally the biggest understatement I could have ever possibly said. I have a link to his fundraiser in my bio on Instagram. But he's been in the process of building a store. And it's like, he's building a store. He's building a store in Gaza. If that's not a reminder that stuff's happening that is actively combating violent systems, like I don't know what is. That's absolutely wild. I'm thinking of community gardens here. I'm thinking of all of the successful land back news. I'm thinking about people contributing to bail funds on a regular basis, literally bringing people home one by one.
People using whistles to like alert people of ICE kidnappings, people putting their bodies in front of cars on the line to prevent kidnappings. These things are happening all around us. These are little moments of abolition. These are little moments of us living into the world that we want to be in. If you're listening to this and you're not someone which I highly doubt you're listening to this if you're not someone who already recognizes the ways that all our liberation is intertwined, but if you're not, all flourishing is mutual, Robin Wall Kimmerer, and we cannot be free until someone else is also free, even if this is Audre Lorde, even if their shackles are very different than my own. Liberation means all of us are liberated. If we got out of Exodus, that Exodus happened, we left Egypt, we got out of Egypt, okay, we're not actually free until everyone is out of Egypt, until everyone is through the narrow place. Like, that is what abolition is. That is what Passover is about. We're literally talking about leaving confinement, leaving slavery, leaving violence and oppression. And that needs to happen for everyone in order for it to matter for us. All of that is bound together. And so bring that to your Seder table this year, boys. Shake it up.
You know how there's these like alternative Seder plate editions? Now I was like, what if you added like a couple of berries? Berries to the Seder plate to honor, what you just shared from Robin Wall Kimmerer.
I love that. And a reminder that part of Passover is the tradition of passing the story down to children. And so if you are somebody who's like, I wish I could talk about liberation at my Seder in a real tangible way, but there are 5-year-olds there. 5-year-olds get it. 5-year-olds are going to school where they have to hide in active shooter trainings and they're understanding the world is terrifying, but they don't have words for it yet. So the more words that you can give kids about their world to understand, and the more you can show them about mutual aid networks and the people who are standing up to ICE and the people who are standing up to the horrifying people in power, the more reassuring it is for them. So if you're somebody who's like, I would love to do this work with children, just know there's so many resources out there, and maybe we can link to some, that talking to kids about this stuff is not traumatizing. Hiding it from them and trying to obscure it and then suddenly exposing them to it in a very traumatic way, or talking about death suddenly when you've never talked about it with them before, that is traumatizing. So think about ways that you can build in some real world connections to your Passover Seder if you have kids, or the inner child in all of us who needs to be addressed and talked to and cared for. So
yes.
I see and hear you if Passover with your family is feeling hard this year. Boy, do I get it. Bring it in the ways that you can. Honor yourself, honor your body, honor what you actually have capacity to engage with. I know you're engaging and changing the world in lots of different ways. If you've tried and your Passover table this year is not where it's happening, yeah, do it in a small way. Put berries on the Seder plate to represent the fact that all flourishing is mutual. Bring a little Haggadah supplement. We have a Haggadah library that I think is in our link tree. I'll make sure it's there. If not, it's definitely in the show notes, of a bunch of different Haggadahs and supplements that are either abolition specific or liberation specific or anti-Zionist in nature. And so bring some of that in. Check out Pillar of Fire Haggadah, which is mostly art based, and just like hang some pieces of art around and like just have it be there in the ways that it feels possible. This is going to be an ongoing series. We're going to continue and talk to some folks who are really entrenched in this work, and we're really excited about that. And our hope with that is that if you listen to this episode and you got something from it and you're thinking or you're feeling in some way, we're hoping that you'll donate to Matir Asurim, which is a network that supports incarcerated folks and their loved ones, as well as chaplains who are working in prisons. And you should check out the work and what they do. We're hoping they'll be part of the series. But if this resonated, send them some money, because I know it goes to people who are inside and people who support people inside. Closing thoughts from Rocki, Jesi?
Anytime you come back to your breath is an act of resistance.
I really love and appreciate you two so much for having this conversation and being brave and showing up here and allowing this space to exist.
Not to get corny on the pod, but fuck if this is not abolitionist in practice. Abolition in praxis.
And I was born on the cob.
Thanks for listening to Making Mensches. Please consider supporting our work by funding us. You can find the donation link on our website, makingmensches.com. You can follow us on Instagram at Making Mensches. We host monthly Shabbats both in person and online, so make sure to sign up for our newsletter, which is on our website, to get updates.
Making Mensches, the podcast, is produced by Elana Lipkin and Jessie Sander. Intro music is by Nate Sander. Editing by Jessie Sander.